On this week's 51%, we're highlighting women in the arts. We tune into a webinar discussing the importance of protecting the spaces where women create, and we also sit down with renowned children's book writer and illustrator Jan Brett.
You can learn to draw. It's the imagination component that makes you a person that wants to spend your whole life coloring.
Our Dr. Sharon Ufberg also speaks with artist Mira Lehr. I'm Jessie King. It's all up next on 51%.
I was standing around like one of those girls I had seen in a movie. The whole world was a movie back then. I had my sunglasses on, I wanted to be seen without seeing shy Lolita. I wasn't really in it, I didn't really get it.
You're listening to 51%, a WAMC production dedicated to women's issues and experiences. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Jessie King. We've got a great roundup of stories and interviews for you today, highlighting women across all mediums of art. Whether you're a painter or photographer, professional or amateur, the act of creating can be a rewarding experience for everyone. We'll start with a recent virtual panel hosted by the National Trust for Historic Preservation that took a look at the importance of preserving places where women made art. The webinar was part of a series of conversations and programs by the Trust recognizing women's history, as well as an exhibition at the Lyndhurst Mansion in Tarrytown, New York, called Women's Work. Valerie Ballant is the director of the Trust's Historic Artist Homes and Studios program, a coalition of museums that were once the personal homes or working studios of American artists. While she says the sites surrounding famous artists like Georgia O'Keeffe are sure to get attention, Haas is trying to expand its membership to smaller, lesser-known artists. After all, if you want to promote women in the arts, it's important to recognize those who were before us.
Without bringing these artists and sites to the forefront, we are not telling an accurate site-specific story of our nation's art history. In the past several years, we have accepted 10 new sites that center women's artistic voices, with more to come later this year.
Ballant says many of the women reflected in Haas membership are part of artist couples. O'Keeffe, of course, was frequently promoted and exhibited in the galleries of her husband, Alfred Stieglitz. Lee Krasner's career is often discussed alongside that of Jackson Pollock. But Ballant says standing in Krasner's studio space and touring her rooms at the Pollock-Krasner house on Long Island gives visitors a fuller sense of who she was, beyond the myths surrounding her relationship.
These sites offer opportunities to witness an artist's evolution and experimentation over time. Here, Anne Norton carves a figurative piece, which ultimately is installed in the landscape she co-designed while suffering from terminal leukemia. But on the same property, soaring architectural works of brick done late in career, a completely different mode. Norton represents the career arc of many women artists who were primarily educators, a role which has largely regulated them into the fringes of recognition, despite their critical impact.
The panel devoted most of its time highlighting efforts to preserve the spots tied to those lesser-known names. In Ettrick, Virginia, alumni of Virginia State University have been working to preserve Azurist South, the home and studio of fellow alum Amaza Lee Meredith. Born in 1895, Meredith not only founded and chaired the Fine Arts Department at VSU, but she was also one of the first Black LGBTQ architects in the U.S. Meredith designed Azurist South herself to live and work in with her partner and dedicated the building to the university upon her death in 1984. Franklin Johnson Norwood, past president of the VSU Alumni Association, says students and alumni are now working to restore the building to its heyday and make it a national landmark. A grant from Benjamin Moore allowed alumni to repaint the exterior, and he says the efforts have helped to bring people together and inspire new students.
And me being a member of the LGBTQ community, I'm proudly married to Dr. Mel Norwood, and we're both in higher education. But being able to, be bold now in these times, but knowing that I stand on the shoulders of an alum that was bold and stood for so much. It's not just Azurist South. Her architectural style, you can see it in the building at Azurist South and at Azurist North in Sag Harbor. And just knowing her contributions to our community as a whole, our university as a whole, and to just being able to set a standard for our female architects.
Speaking from Staten Island and New York City, Victoria Monroe stressed that protecting these places both preserves the memory of these artists and our larger national history. Monroe is the executive director of the Alice Austin House Museum, the former home and studio of Victorian photographer Alice Austin. Scott says Austin really broke all the rules for upper-class women in the late 1800s. After receiving her first camera at age 10, she became one of the first women photographers to work outside of a studio, carrying up to 50 pounds of equipment on her bicycle as she snapped photos of street life across New York City. She was independently wealthy, but she didn't look at photography as a hobby, taking a paid assignment documenting immigrant quarantine stations during the 1890s and actively promoting and copyrighting her work. Monroe says Austin took about 8,000 photos over the course of her life, capturing a changing New York City at the turn of the century. Austin was also a lesbian, and her pictures with her partner, Gertrude Tate, and their friends provide valuable documentation of intimate relationships between women during the period. Monroe says Austin ultimately lost her fortune with the stock market crash of 1929. She and Tate were evicted from their Staten Island cottage in 1945 and then separated by their families. Monroe says it was the rediscovery of Austin's photos and a massive campaign to protect and restore the cottage that kept her story from being lost.
You know, her work was nearly lost to time, but she did give all of her glass plate negatives to the Historical Society, obviously recognizing that she had created an incredibly important historical document. We maintain 3 contemporary photographic galleries. It's so important for us to provide a platform for contemporary photographers and explore the work of other historical photographers. And of course, we have a full suite of education programs that are based in photographic storytelling. So it's making those really important connections to the public today. And in 2017, we were able to update our national designation to include LGBTQ history as an area of significance, which was really wonderful.
The National Trust for Historic Preservation's Where Women Made History program launched in 2020 to promote and protect 100 sites related to women's history and inspire the public to identify more than 1,000 such sites in total. The Women's Work exhibit at Tarrytown's Lyndhurst Mansion is running through September 26th. You can find a link to the whole panel at WAMCpodcast.org.
So this chart is important to me because it shows you all the countries from Germany to Norway to Austria, and you can see Martinique. And even she set the night before Christmas in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, which I thought was really lovely. Mm-hmm. And Botswana and Canada, and then a place that she made up that they call Janland. I also like that this
founded in 1791, the Albany Institute of History and Art here in New York's Capital Region is considered one of the oldest museums and galleries in the country. I stopped by recently to check out one of its latest exhibits, celebrating the work of longtime children's book illustrator and writer Jan Brett, titled Jan Brett, Stories Near and Far. Now, when we think about art, I think we usually picture art museums and galleries like this one in Albany. But there's just as much craft in the art we see and use every day, in the paintings we hang in our homes and the stories we read to our children. Jan Brett's colorful characters, many of them animals, have been charming kids for decades, with more than 41 million books in print. Now, thanks to the Albany Institute and the Norman Rockwell Museum, they're getting the gallery treatment. In addition to classics like The Hat and The Three Snow Bears, the museum has a whole section dedicated to Cozy, Brett's 2020 book about a friendly, fluffy muskox keeping his friends warm in the Alaskan winter. Cozy is set to return this fall in a sequel titled Cozy in Love. As an added treat, Brett recently sat down with me to look back on her career and talk about her current process.
Well, you know, I wanted to be an illustrator since I was like 5 or 6. If you had asked me, children's book illustrator, that was going to be my job. And I love to draw. And it might have been I was a little bit awkward about social things and interacting with kids, being the oldest and having kind of really wonderful parents and not really protective, but they really believed in a beautiful childhood. So going to school was a little different than I thought it would be. You know, I was used to a lot of respect in the house and stuff. And I had a great school. It's just, you know, I think all kids go through that. But when I could do a drawing, everything I felt and believed in and wanted to have happen all kind of merged into one. It was wonderful. I can remember wanting to go to the circus, very excited about it. And then it was canceled at the last moment. And my teacher said, Jan, the whole group can do a picture of whatever you want to do. And I said, I want to do my family going to the circus. And so I put the horses with the plumes and all the tigers and lions and all the kind of food I wanted to eat. And I was up like in a second. But then when I went to the circus finally, it was like such a letdown because the lady on the horse wasn't there, and it was just not what I expected. My parents were fantastic. They gave us lots of art supplies, and we had tons of animals. So I think that, it just became the place to go for me. And every year I would add something new. I had a best friend named Marla, and we used to just draw for hours. So when I talked to kids, and I did have a chance at the Albany Museum to talk to some kids when I was just there recently. I'm going back in December. And many of them would say that they love to create a world. And those are the ones, not the ones that have the great drawing ability, although that is wonderful, but you can learn to draw. It's the imagination component, I think, that makes you a person that wants to spend your whole life coloring.
I feel like that's a good point because like that imagination part is so important. How do you sustain or, feed your imagination? Because I feel like when I was younger, I was much more imaginative than I might be now. Now I think I would come up with wild ideas and stuff when I was a kid, and somehow it seems a little bit more difficult once you get older.
Yeah. Well, I think every artist, whether it's dance or writing or music or whatever, I think that you early on discover this place that you go on another level maybe, or consciousness, where you kind of forget the world around you, and it gets fed by some, people call it the muse, people call it your soul. I mean, I don't know what the name of it is, but it just kind of feeds your activity. So the main thing is just sit down and start doing it. And when this magic happens, then you just go with it. And sometimes it takes you places you don't know. You can't imagine, where did this idea come from? And I just want kids to be able to experience that for themselves. I think we, as human beings, if you look at the cultures of the world, it happens to all humans. It's humanity. It's our humanity, this creative force, being able to find it.
What does your process usually look like when you're starting a book, and how long does it usually take for you to finish one?
It takes a year because of the publishing dates. And it's a good thing, because otherwise I would just get really intense on something and kind of let time would just drift away. So it's good to have kind of a little bit of a discipline there. This year I'm doing an Arctic version of Alice in Wonderland, and I'm taking 2 years to do it because it's so long. So I'll pick out a story, talk it over with my editor, and even the art director. I have this genius art director. My editor is fantastic as well. And we'll talk about the story, how that fits in with what I've been doing lately. And I always have the last say, but they have a lot of experience and I trust their judgment. So I'll do a story on the longhand, or sometimes I'll put it on the computer, kind of combos of both. And then I'll do a book dummy, just a little cartoony type book that has 32 pages, which children's books generally do have. And then I'll take that to the art director and my editor, and won't be critical in the sense that I'll be saddened, or it will be all positive. I'll be thinking, how can we make this better? And then I'll do the finishes, which is what I love to do, because I can get lost in the drawing. With Cozy, and then Cozy in Love, the book that's just being published this fall, I went to Alaska because my daughter moved there. She said, Mom, there's this muskox farm. Muskox. I remember this National Geographic book that I had when I was little, and it had this animal that looked like it was out of the Pleistocene. It had the long hair like a woolly mammoth, and had this big hump on its back, and it could withstand these freezing cold temperatures. But then it had like a really cute face. And she said, there's a farm there where they're trying to sustain this herd and replenish it, because they were shot to extinction in the 1800s. And now they are back. They came from Greenland. They had to bring like 37 in the 1930s and establish this herd. And so I went there. I went to this muskox farm, and they were so amazing. Both the males and females have these long curving horns that kind of look like a Dutch girl's cap. And then they have little white legs that are very chubby. And so I got the idea of the story from that trip. So going to a place often will spark ideas. In between, I guess when I'm thinking up about the story, I might have an idea if I'm going to a place. Then when the story is unfolding, I'm doing on the finishes, I will go back there. So this last time I went back to Fox Island, which is in Resurrection Bay. It's very rich in all the sea mammals and birds and stuff. It's a very famous place for nature watching, and there's a glacier. And there were puffins there in this waterfall on Fox Island. And they're the cutest birds you ever saw. The giant beaks, they look like little clowns with yellow and orange. So I thought, I've got to put that in the book. And so the puffin became kind of the character that helps out with Cozy, who finds a marooned beluga whale. And I got that idea from going to Fox Island, which is really cool.
When it comes to the actual writing and storytelling, what is your inspiration there? And what kinds of stories and messages are important to you?
I would say most of my stories have a character that has to kind of puzzle things out. When I was little, I loved to read, and I had tons and tons of books. And when the book had either magic or a rescuer, I'd always feel like I can understand those stories. I was okay with them, but I was more fascinated by the ones where they puzzled things out. So in Cozy, he actually does rescue the beluga whale, but he does it by throwing into her little inlet. He pushes with his head all these big rocks that the glacier has brought down that kind of takes up the water in the inlet, and she's able to get free. One thing I forgot to mention was she got iced in the little inlet, which happens all the time in Alaska. The ice forms very quickly, and many times the beluga whales get stuck, and that's not always a good outcome. I got the idea from one of Aesop's Tales, which is one of probably our oldest stories. And there's this raven who was very, very thirsty, and he found a jug of water, but the water wasn't all the way to the top. So he puts in little pebbles one by one until the water level was raised up to the lip of the jug, and then he drank his fill. And I loved that story, and I thought that could happen to a character in one of my stories. And also the kind of subplot is the way that the muskoxes show that they are going to be the big man is they bop each other in the heads. They run at full speed like mountain goats and crash their big bosses of their heads. It's very violent and scary. One will just walk away from the battle, and he doesn't get to be with the females. And then the one who does win gets to be with the females. Well, Cozy gets completely routed, and he's very sad because he loves this muskox that has a little sparkle in her eye named Lofty. But then when he does this rescue of Bella the whale, she sees what a big heart he has because he tries so hard to save her. And so then they end up together at the end. And that's the love part of Cozy in Love, that he wins her heart, not by his strength, but by his good deeds.
I love that. And I really like the idea of, having your characters sort of puzzle through things themselves. Because I do think that's an important message to give kids that sense of agency, that they can puzzle through the things that they face in their lives as well.
I agree with you. And I remember, I would say if I have a talent is I can remember what it was like to be 6. When you're little, you're constantly being put in these situations where you don't know what's going on. Everybody assumes you do. And you go to your instincts, and they're not always right. Like you go to a birthday party and you think, well, I think I'll have that piece with the big pink rose. Well, guess what? That's for the birthday girl. You have to learn those things very, discreetly so that no one thinks you're a brat. So I always used to think to myself, I like those books where the character puzzles things out, because that's what I would do all the time. I love my audience of children because not only are they learning how to puzzle things out, but their thoughts go in places you wouldn't expect. An adult gets a book and they're looking and thinking almost like they're reviewing the book, like, why do I like this? And, what is going to happen at the end? And what is this character trying to tell me? Whereas a child would just leap in and put their little pointer finger out and look at the illustrations. they have the same intelligence. We're just inexperienced when we're little, but we can understand nuance and metaphor and all the things we have names for as adults, but that's all there. Like I loved Beatrix Potter because she would put big words like plums in a pudding, these big words in her beautiful stories. And you should have the slates on a roof. And I'd go, oh, I think I did see a house that had slates on the roof, just like in Beatrix Potter. She put these little details in that would kind of add to the place. And I could associate with things around me that would keep me fascinated.
Well, it certainly comes across in your work. Going through the exhibit, I felt like you could look at each panel for forever. There was just so much detail, even in like your borders. It was almost photographic. On that sort of technical side, for maybe those who are wanting to work on illustration or work on their painting skills and like sort of training their eye, what are some of the tips that you've taken away from your career in that regard?
Oh, I've got some good, really good ones. If you're drawing and it doesn't look quite right to you, go into the bathroom and put it in front of the mirror. And it's like looking at it for the first time because everything is backwards. And then you have a little bit of a different view. And so like maybe one leg of your character is too long or the head, one eye is higher than the other, and that will pop right out at you. Then number two, like you tipped me off on this one because you said getting your artist's eye ready. Whenever you're bored, and when you're a child, you're always bored at some point in your day. When you say to yourself, I'm bored, say, okay, this is when I'm going to look at things and try to figure out what makes them drawable. Like I'm looking out the window right now and I'm seeing a tree. Now, if you go in a child's classroom and they're drawing a forest, they will always make the trees black. And it's light gray and it's got tons of light green on it, lichen, and it's not even a birch tree. So we have white birch trees. We've got this gray, I think that is a maple. I've got an oak there, and just like look at things and take a mental note of it, of what it really looks like. You can take your finger and make the little sign that looks like an O, like your thumb is touching your pointer finger. Mm-hmm. And you can, like, let's say you're looking at the sky and go, oh, the sky is a really interesting color. But is it because the hills underneath are making it that color of in contrast? So you make that little circle and put it on the sky. And you say, oh, well, that's really purpley blue. And then you can put a little circle on the hills underneath and say, you know, those really aren't green. They're more of a gray green. And then you can just kind of think about that. Or let's say you're in the classroom and you're bored. You can look at people's heads and say, boy, some people have round heads on a long neck. Some people have square heads on a short neck. I learned that when I did a portrait class. Because when you're drawing your characters, then you can, you know, use this toolbox that you have. Like you want to have someone look like they're, you know, ready for action. You might want to have them have a kind of a smallish head and broader shoulders, and you're looking like they're agile. Or pay special attention to the eyes, because as human beings, that's where we look when we want to find out what someone else is thinking. Or if you're drawing a picture, you want your character to express something. So again, I take a little mirror, put it on my desk, and then I make the face of the character that I'm drawing. And weirdly enough, it helps. And I can say, oh, well, the eyebrows kind of go up, or the eyes kind of get squinty. And then my character kind of comes alive. I know a lot of the kids do more the cartoony kind of characters. All those things work with the cartoony characters too. Then you don't have to do a detailed style like me. Everybody has their own style. That's the beauty of it, is that develops over time. So I guess the practicing part, I really didn't take art lessons until I got to museum school in Boston. And my mother, who was very wise, didn't want us to. She wanted us to use our imagination and find our own little artistic tricks. And that worked for me. So I would say, spend lots of time drawing. Put the cookie timer out, put it on an hour, get your piece of paper, and I guarantee you by the end of the hour, you'll surprise yourself, because we have this innate ability to draw. It might not be like my drawing because I'm Jan, but you could be Jessie. The Jessie style might emerge. And so you don't want to miss that. It's a big show.
Well, Jan, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me. Jan Brett is a children's book writer and illustrator with more than 41 million books in print, including titles like The Mitten, The Three Snow Bears, and Gingerbread Baby. Her new book, Cozy in Love, will be coming out this fall, and her exhibit at the Albany Institute of History and Art, titled Jan Brett, Stories Near and Far, is open through December 31st. Jan, thanks again.
Thank you.
Before we go, we'll leave you with a conversation between our Dr. Sharon Ufberg and Mira Lehr. Lehr is a renowned multidisciplinary artist whose work encompasses a multitude of paintings, sculptures, video installations, and more. Described as an eco-feminist, Lehr has long drawn inspiration from the natural world and done her part to support women in the arts. In 1961, she moved from New York to Miami and co-founded the Continuum Gallery, one of the first women artist collectives in the Southeast, to showcase female artists when no one else would. Now in her late 80s, Lehr is still a very active artist. Her work has been widely exhibited across the U.S. and was recently the subject of a more than 400-page monograph titled Mira Lehr, Arc of Nature. Again, she spoke with Dr. Sharon Ufberg, co-founder of the California-based personal development and wellness company Borrowed Wisdom, for her 51% segment, Force of Nature.
It is clear that your work portrays the beauty of nature, but why are you labeled an eco-feminist artist?
Well, I think it's because the ecology has become so important today. We are in a crisis situation with the planet, with the air quality, with the rising seas. So many things are being watched. Years ago, people didn't think of themselves as being eco anything because the planet was not screaming the way it is now. So it's a term that is very widely used now to describe what's happening in our environment.
And since the 60s, you were called that, though, right?
That's correct. I guess it's a word that came about as the planet became more and more in trouble.
The art historian Eleanor Hartney wrote that you shifted your work into new, more activist directions and explorations that push the limits of painting, experimenting with a wide range of new techniques. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, how your art's changed over the years, what you're up to?
Well, years ago, I was interested more in the composition of a work, the beauty of the work, more about a structure of a painting. As time went on and the environment started to become very important, and we started to worry about what was happening on the planet, things changed. And I felt I needed to do something that was more kind of not so good looking as having more of a danger underpinning. And that's when I started to use ignited gunpowder and ignited fuses. They actually burn the paper or the canvas you're working on, and they are very visible because it's fire, and it gives you a sense of danger and leaves a mark that you can't get any other way. That is a very ominous kind of feeling you get when you look at it. It's kind of thorny or burned and has a history of some fiery event.
It sounds like you're using your current work in a very kind of activist way. I'm wondering if that's always been the case, or it's just now that you're finding the need to kind of actually put that into the work itself.
Well, that's a good question you're asking. I feel that my work has changed considerably from the calm days of making a beautiful painting to these days where I'm making something that I want to speak to the public. I want the public to understand what's happening. I want to get the attention that you certainly get when you're blowing things up with fire.
Absolutely. Although, Myra, I have to say, given that you started one of the first women's artist collectives back in the 60s, you were an activist even back then. And maybe it didn't come through your art, but you certainly showed your activist nature. And I'm curious what compelled you to start that collective when you moved to Miami.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It is an activist nature that I had. I just didn't realize, I didn't name it. But what happened is that when I moved to Miami, I actually was born in New York, but I moved to Miami when I was a little girl. And then I left, went back to New York, went to college, upstate New York, and lived in New York for many years until I did move back here. When I moved back, nothing was really going for artists, and certainly not for a woman artist who was married and had children. We were considered dilettantes. So I couldn't figure out how to get out of this label, terrible label, and lack of respect and acknowledgement of women artists that was happening. And so I thought one way to do it is to have women collective where we would show our work, and selling the work was major because people always respected artists if they were making money. And, I had never thought about that so much. So I started this collective and had 10 women artists to begin with, and we became very successful. We showed our work here and over the United States. Later, we even showed in Europe, and we had very active women join us. So it put a new look on a bunch of women who were struggling to find their place, which they couldn't find without having an institution like this set up.
So here we fast forward, it's 2022. Has the inclusion of women in the arts succeeded?
Well, for sure things have gotten better, but there's a long way still to go. Women are not paid as much for their work. They're not valued as much in museums. There is a predominance of men, and they get a lot of the publicity. We're still, I would say, second-class citizens. But in many areas, women have become very, very popular. And we have a lot of very popular women artists now, which we didn't used to have. So there's things to look forward to.
Well, thanks to you, I think more women have gotten a chance to do that. So thank you.
They have
for
hope
that.
now. Yeah.
Myra, how can people find you if they want to see your work, if they want to get in touch, if they want to commission a piece, if they want to buy your art? Can you give us some details of where people can find you, spell your name, give us your website?
My website is miralehr.com, MIRALEHR.com. I'm also represented by the Rosenbaum Gallery in Boca Raton. They sell my work and show my work.
Okay, Mira, thank you so much for being with us today. That's Mira Lehr, artist, eco-feminist. I so appreciate you being here today. And this is Dr. Sharon Ufberg. Thanks so much.
That's a wrap on this week's 51%. 51% is a national production of WAMC Northeast Public Radio. It's produced by me, Jesse King. Our executive producer is Dr. Alan Chartock, and our theme is Lolita by the Albany-based artist Girl Blue. Thanks again to Jan Brett, the folks at the Albany Institute of History and Art, Dr. Sharon Ufberg, and Mira Lehr for participating in this week's episode. To learn more about our guests and the show, check us out at WAMCpodcasts.org. You'll be able to find episodes new and old there as well, or wherever you get your podcasts. Until next week, thanks for tuning in. I'm Jesse King from 51%.
I was every single girl, I was nobody else, I was so sure of myself. I was 15 and a half, he was a hollow laugh, and I lost my cool.